Hello.
Hello.
What's going on?
We are stripping and reinstalling everything into the Lighthouse.
New year 2023, fresh start. We decided to spring clean the Lighthouse, which is the grade suite at our studio. We've been working there for nearly 2 years now. We built the whole facility, and the intention at the start was to put a really high-spec Mac Pro into the Lighthouse. However, we didn't want to commit to it at first, and we wanted to just see how we worked in that room. Basically, we weren't quite sure, coming out of coronavirus and all of that, whether we would actually be doing lots of work in the studio or whether we'd be working from home and back and forth. So we thought sticking with the more laptop-oriented setup would actually be a safer bet. Hindsight being 2020, we know now that everything's moved on and we are doing lots of attended edits and lots of attended grades. So we're in a position where we do want to perhaps bring in a new computer to that space that isn't the laptop-based solution, which is going to be much more powerful and it's going to be permanently set up in there, just better all round. But we're not looking really at the Mac Pros anymore. We're looking more at one of the new Apple Silicon-based products that are coming online. Plenty powerful. We're not going to go for a mini or anything small. It would be one of the heftier options, but definitely not the Mac Pro. With that in mind, Kofi wanted to start with a clean slate and get rid of all of the extra stuff that's just accumulated and really just have a reroute of all of the cabling in there. There's something deeply satisfying about resetting your workstation, just getting everything dialed in, and then you can approach everything with a little bit of a clear head and know if something isn't working, if suddenly a monitor goes off, you know exactly which cable to follow, you know exactly what's going to be the issue, and there's only a certain number of things within that chain which are all easily visible that will be causing that issue. Whereas before, with everything being gradually introduced and tweaked, lots of extra cables accumulate. There's various attempts at cable management that come in that tie things together permanently, which makes it really hard to get one single cable out or add a cable in. So we've completely redone all of that.
We're definitely close to the end of getting everything out.
There's a lot of this stuff.
There's a lot of that stuff.
What's that stuff all about?
That is some cable management.
I think I've seen the anime of this. Now, I appreciate a lot of people aren't going to be in a position where they can set up something as elaborate as this, but I thought it might be interesting to jump in and look at what everything actually does and how it all fits together and why we have those different elements within this setup, so that if you get to the position where you need to do something similar, you've got a bit of an idea of what everything does, why it's needed, and how you plumb it all together, because it can be quite daunting. So here we go. I've done this diagram which shows all of the various bits of equipment and the ins and the outs that go with it. So first off, we're starting down here with the MacBook Pro currently. Like I say, that was our solution for quite a long time. It isn't the best option for this, but it did allow us to stay mobile and just take the whole computer out and then edit from home, coronavirus at the back of our heads. That was all fed through to the eGPU, which was our concession to getting more power out of that MacBook. So pre-Apple Silicon, you could run to an eGPU, this is the Blackmagic eGPU just here, via a Thunderbolt cable, and that gives you all of that extra processing power to be able to work in Resolve and still get, decent export times, better playback, all the rest of it. So the eGPU Thunderbolt connection to the MacBook, and then the Thunderbolt out of the eGPU daisy chains to the Blackmagic Ultra Studio Extreme 4K. The Ultra Studio is sort of the heart of the whole grade suite. It allows you to feed the signal from your computer out to a number of different monitors. You can also bring inputs in if you want, although we don't find ourselves doing that as much, but it means that it's not going through any of the processing that the computer would normally apply to the image that you see on your screens. So it gives you a much cleaner, better, more accurate version of what is going on. And that's really important when you come to grading, but also on playback, the timing is much better coming from an Ultra Studio. Now the Macs are pretty good, but running into the Ultra Studio allows us to do a lot of other things. Like, for example, we have these purple SDI outputs coming out of there. Now, one of them is going across to our reference ISO screen, and that runs into a Blackmagic SDI to HDMI conversion box, and then HDMI into this reference ISO. That's got the full screen preview of what we're cutting, what we're grading. So that's our go-to for looking at what the image is actually doing. Now it also feeds out another SDI to the scopes over on the left-hand side, and the scopes daisy chain from one to the next, and that allows us to look at technically what is going on with the image. So we've got our vector scope, we've got our RGB parades up on there, we've got our histograms if we want, and that means that we can look without having to reference the graphical user interface and switch between different things. We've always got within our view what is happening on the scopes and how the changes that we're making, in primaries, any of the changes that we're making with curves or any of the other adjustments we might be doing, what is that doing technically to the image? So that is where the scopes come in. Now, additionally, we have a third output which goes to another HDMI to SDI conversion box just here, going out to our big screen TV. And that's so that when we have a client in, they're sitting back on the couch, they can look at the big image on the screen. The person who's driving the session will be looking at the reference ISO screen just there. But as the person who's doing the edit or the grade, you want to be able to look at that screen and not be worried that someone's trying to look over your shoulder. So the client looks at the big screen TV just there. Those three SDI outputs give us everything we need in terms of distributing the actual clean feed of the image to places it needs to go. We have coming out of the eGPU an HDMI which is going to our GUI, which allows us to see all of the timeline and all the rest of it, and anything else on the computer. That is just HDMI'd out of the eGPU, so that is what you would normally see just on your MacBook screen or your iMac screen. That goes into there. On top of the visuals, we also have the audio signal feeding out of the Ultra Studio, going to an amp which is located underneath the desk, and then that amp goes out to the two monitor speakers that we have. We've just got a stereo setup in there for the moment. Those are some Miller & Kreisel monitor speakers. I used to do a lot of audio recording, and they're a set that I have and I trust and I know the sound of. So we have those set up in there on either side, just on a couple of foam blocks. Gives us everything we need for basically any job we've ever done. We've never had to cut anything in any kind of surround sound so far, but in the future we might upgrade that, and we have the flexibility to do that if we need. There are a couple of other things that we needed to consider as well. So, for example, most of the footage is coming off our server, and that is located in a dedicated server room. We have Cat6 cable run throughout the building, and everything goes to Cat6 wall box just here, and that then feeds out to our Sonnet dongle just there. Basically, that allows us to get really high-speed connection to the server, and that Thunderbolt connects into the MacBook just there. All of the editors can be working off that same server and do collaboration if we want to, or be accessing different files. We have super fast connections in all of the different edit suites. And then finally, we have the only other two wired connections going on, which is USB connection to the Blackmagic mini panel for grading, and to the editor keyboard as well. Those USB connections are being fed currently into the Blackmagic eGPU. So that is what the whole diagram for the room looks like. We removed a lot of cabling that wasn't needed anymore. There was some extra USB device in there which we weren't using. There were extra SDI cables. We simplified the stuff going to the scopes, neatened it all up, ran the power in a slightly better way as well, so that things aren't, running along the power cables. For example, audio, we want to try and keep that separate. It's a balanced system, but still running the speaker cables separately, just dialing everything in, getting it to be the best that it possibly can. Now, I appreciate that this setup involves quite a lot of different elements, but you can do simpler versions of this, and indeed in some of the other areas that are still moving, we have a much smaller Ultra Studio box, which just gives us that one clean feed out rather than the multitude of options that the Ultra Studio Extreme 4K does. But it really depends on what you're going to be using it for. And for the main grade suite at Still Moving, we wanted to have that flexibility. Now in the future, we will be going and introducing that new Mac into the mix just here. But what is great about the way that it's all cabled together now is that essentially we can just remove the eGPU, remove the laptop, and then everything that was plugged into the eGPU just gets plugged into the new Mac when it comes in. We'll have plenty of I/O in that. We've got all the Thunderbolt ports. So in theory, it should be a really quick, easy switch just to drop that into the position. Everything's ready to receive it, and we don't really have to change anything. You know, power's already run, the I/O's already run, so it'll be a seamless switch when it does happen. Hope you found that interesting, and if you have any questions, if you're not sure about your own setup, you know, how you should be doing things, how different things connect, why we do some of the things we do. For example, we've gone with the amp just here and the speakers because those are things which already existed and actually are really high quality. You might find that rather than going with an amp and passive speakers, you're going to be using a set of active speakers, in which case the wiring is going to be slightly different, but in principle, a lot of it stays the same. Drop any questions down below, happy to answer. And yeah, enjoy this montage of how the grade suite looks now it's all set up neatly.